And so I didn't just allow an emotion a thought to come in and dictate how I was supposed to act, because I knew like my emotions and my thoughts were like tornadoes,
Hmm.
they were like roller coasters. And
Hmm.
so I really started that self mastery, and I did slow down, like you said in the beginning, and actually started to sort those things. And it took about 2 to 3 years.
Welcome to the Strong Tower Mental Health Podcast, where you will be encouraged in Christ, where we discuss mental health freedom through the simplicity of the gospel. In this world with so much hurt and pain, we need answers to be free and live with who we are in Christ instead of who we are not. Christians should look different from the rest of the world, living with the fruits of the Spirit, growing from the seed of Christ within us. In this podcast, I bring in topics like inner healing, deliverance, counseling, coaching, trauma, healthy relationships, neuroscience, healing, and more. I interview amazing guests with incredible testimonies that will move you into your own freedom and, most importantly, know Jesus more. You will be inspired, encouraged, and transformed by what Romans 12:2 says, the renewing of your mind, and not the patterns of this world. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, but what's more important is that I'm simply a little girl sitting at the feet of Jesus, being curious. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling or psychiatric care. If you are in a crisis, call or text your local crisis center or visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Come along with me in this journey where Jesus is in our mental health and freedom is where we live. Hello and welcome to the Strong Tower Mental Health Podcast. I am your host, Heidi Mortenson, and I have Jeremy Butros with me. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I am really excited to have you on. You are a Christian, a father. You do ghostwriting. You have recently spoke up about an experience that you've had with some deep church hurt. And I am excited to have you on, to have you share your story. Just a precursor for those who are listening and watching. If you are experiencing something that is difficult yourself, just a warning of some of the things that we will talk about could be difficult and could be hard. And I will talk about where you can actually go and get help at the end of this. But kind of a trigger warning that some of the things that we talk about, just notice it as you're listening, as you're watching. If you kind of feel that triggering, that feeling inside of your body, just notice it. Welcome Jesus into that space. He is our comforter. God is our healer. He cares about all of our emotions. So just a precursor before we dive into this conversation. So thanks for being here, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us about yourself and even just your testimony with being a Christian and knowing God. And yeah, I would love to hear about you.
Yeah. I always tell people that I was born saved. I know it's a joke, but people can relate to that, where you just feel like you always grew up in the church. And
Yes.
my mom actually exposed me at a really young age to different ministries, just seeking God, just kind of finding that God's involved in different ministries and not just a denomination. And so we went on missions trips, and that really opened up my mind. For not only the need that people have in the world, but for God, and how God could show up in that need in an incredible way. Just really, something that is extraordinarily hard to find when you're at home. Just that the stark contrast of need versus the desire for God, and you see people's overwhelming um, opportunity to pursue God for different reasons, because we were so blessed in our Western culture. So it really opened me up to pursuing God in new ways, and I ended up going to ministry school after a missions trip. It was really impactful on my life. It was with Randy Clark and Pastor Bill Johnson. It was one of Randy Clark's missions trips in Brazil. And my world was radically changed after that trip. Like, you show up, and then at the end, they have you like preaching, and you're like, teenagers, they have you preaching and praying for people. And I just felt like God, kind of, I invited God in. I felt like God, opened himself up to me in incredible ways. And my life was forever changed on those trips. And then I went into ministry school and kind of started the pursuit of, inviting God into my life on a regular basis and seeing what I could do to partner with him in life.
Where did you go to ministry school?
at Bethel
Oh,
BSSM in Reading. Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah, and tell me a little bit about that and what that was like for you. And then because I know third year you served someone, so if you can share about how you
Hmm.
landed with serving another ministry in third year.
Sure. Yeah. So I went, I think 6 or 7 years into when they started the school, and honestly, it was truly an incredible experience. It was a smaller school that at that time. I know it's grown substantially since then. But the relationships and the different people that I got to spend so much time with, and it's really like a school environment. So you're in class certain parts of the week, and you've got assignments, you've got homework, and they were developing an incredible curriculum for different aspects of pursuing God and walking out ministry. And then now they've got other things like business and even IT stuff. But the dedicated time of intentionality to develop yourself, get healed yourself, to work through some of your traumas, work through some of your problems, so that you could actually be meaningful and purposeful in your relationships and in ministry was really nice. I really enjoyed it. They bring in guest speakers all the time, so like they'd have conferences, so every week you'd have somebody new speaking into your life practically. And then some people go to second year, and then others as well go into third year. And with third year, I actually had a dream in between my second and third year, and I felt like it was just an incredible dream. And God's actually spoken to me with the transitional times of my life where I'd actually have dreams. So this was a really specific dream involving different aspects of heaven, and it was really interesting. The dream was practical as well, and it had some kind of coded mystery language in it. And I shared the dream with uh, Pastor Bill's former assistant at the time, and because I felt like it involved them at some point, like it was for them to hear. And I knew that it had some connection to Pastor Bill. And so they shared the dream, and I'm just processing it. I feel like God's involved. I don't really understand the logic there. The logic train doesn't go, in terms of you have a dream and then you get something out of it or whatever.
Mhm.
I didn't intend to get anything out of it. But what I did do out of my, overflow of my heart is I went and talked to Pastor Bill, and I said, is there any way that I could serve you? Go get your mail, take it from your mailbox and take it into your house, or meet you at the airport and carry your bag to your car. That's literally what I said. And Pastor Bill told me the very thing that was spoken in my dream before he heard the dream. He quoted the exact line, the most powerful line in the dream. And he knew what the cost was for me to do that. Um and it was God. It felt like it was God. He didn't know. He At that point I
No.
don't think he heard the dream, because I shared it later with the former assistant. And he had two prior, like, I guess maybe interim or like part-time kind of help. He had two prior people, like Chris Overstreet and then there was Joaquin Evans. They kind of shadowed him around a little bit. But I was really his first intern, and they brought in a few others as
Wow.
well.
That's cool.
So because he never figured out how they could do it, because his schedule was so crazy,
Mm.
that how does anybody go through school and also be an intern for Pastor Bill, and what would you do? So they were trying to figure that out. But I ended up traveling around the world with him for a year. In addition to going on some trips, you can go on some trips previous to that. And then I had, met with him every week, several times for different reasons. And that was absolutely phenomenal, unbelievably incredible. And God provided supernaturally for me to do that. I literally had quit my job because the schedule wouldn't allow me to keep a job and do this internship, because the schedule was so crazy. Like
Mhm.
he'd leave somewhere on Tuesday, get back on Friday, and then he'd be speaking on Sunday, and then we fly out on Sunday night somewhere, and that's how much travel they were doing. And so God supernaturally provided the finances for me to go on these trips. I literally had $500 in my bank account, and I'd get a check from some stranger uh, for the next month's amount of trips because I had to pay a month in advance for some of the trips I was on because of the
Yeah.
deposits of the flights and the hotels and stuff. And I never told anybody that I needed money, and I never sent out any letters asking for money. It was just absolutely incredible. And obviously, God gave me the vision for it. He obviously
Mhm.
provided the provision for it, which is really
Right.
cool.
Right.
And I felt just tremendously blessed. And I had honestly, genuinely, I had just the most wonderful experience with Pastor Bill and Benny, and the staff. I understand people have theological differences, and they have issues with maybe some of the things that have things that have happened or situations that have happened at Bethel, and they're right to their opinion and their theological underpinnings. But my experience was great. Like I felt like the genuine people that I got to know were had some of the most wonderful, heartfelt relationships with God that I experienced personally in my life. And I had been, in church. Like as I said, I grew up in church, and not everybody in church was that nice to me.
Right.
So
So you had a lot to compare to be able to know what it was like to be with him.
yeah, yeah, and obviously, people get caught up on, oh, I think about this theological thing differently, and therefore I hate them. It's like, well, if you only knew these people, I think, like I describe in my video on my YouTube, my heart is incredibly soft for Pastor Bill and Benny, and just how gracious they were to me and how kind they were to me. If I think about them too long, I start crying. I really do. It's just such a beautiful, they're beautiful people. And I never in my I'm skipping ahead, but I never wanted to change my experience that I had at Bethel by introducing a conversation about my trauma with other people for in terms of Bethel. I didn't want to change that image that I had. I didn't want to change that relationship that I felt like I had by bringing up something that could alter their image of me and our relationship. So anyway, I really preserved that. I tried to protect that in my mind because I felt like it was so beautiful. But
I'm glad that you did. I mean, this is where I reached out to you because there was something about you that felt really healthy and that I feel like you've done a lot of work.
mhm,
So can you talk about then how where the trauma starts and where that began? So you had this wonderful experience. God is
mhm,
moving, you're
mhm.
growing, God's providing. Where did the trauma start?
So I did have, which I address in a few couple of my videos. I did have an underlying trauma response from verbal abuse when I was really young. So I just kind of quarantined that, and I did it in a way where it didn't affect my daily function. It just was, it existed, and I figured out how to have a relationship and just kind of forget about it, push beyond it. Even though I did have a trauma response with that, like standing next to a fire, like the horses do. And so I did kind of carry some of that as I was really young. But then going into ministry school, you work on these things, some of these things.
Yes.
I went in, I started working for a ministry in Kansas City, a guy by the name of Bob Hartley. His daughter introduced me. I'm from Kansas City originally, so it was like fine to just kind of go back
Home.
home after school.
Yep.
And some trauma started there in terms of his interactions, and people would be like, well, it's just his quirky nature, but extremely unhealthy nature in terms of interaction with people and how he would use different situations to get what he wanted,
Yeah.
cross boundaries that were continually set all the time, and you do it in public, and then obviously it's obviously in private. And then, that was like the beginning of, okay, maybe these people are just like different. Maybe this is a thorn in my flesh. And you start doing the whole conversation of
You
like,
question yourself a bit.
yeah, yeah,
You think,
exactly.
I'm
Because,
not godly enough. I need to do more work. This is the problem with my heart and the sheep is they're these important, great leaders. So we should listen
mhm.
to them.
And everybody loves them. And so you go out, they go out on stage, right? They got 500 to 1,000 people. Everybody claps, stands up, and applauds, and they go buy their books at the end. And then you have these experiences, and it's like, it's so easy to second guess yourself.
Right. Well,
Because like,
it's like gaslighting. That's this constant gaslighting. Like, no, that didn't happen. There's something wrong with you, Jeremy. You
yeah,
know, he's this man of God who everybody likes and thinks is amazing. You're the problem.
yeah, and I I stayed working with Bob because of a man named John Swart. He was he was the manager in charge of all the organizations. He was so incredible and so fatherly. I felt like, okay, I'll stay, serve him,
Yeah.
and I felt like I was serving God in the middle of like, these experiences. So it's like when people are like, why didn't you leave if you had this awkward experience or they did this thing? I'm like, well, I personally felt like I was doing something. I was like serving God.
Right.
I saw beyond the person. Because I understand you look at the Bible for 10 minutes and you have all these failures, these men and
Right.
women of God that are like
Yeah,
filled with failures. And
that is
so I'm like,
true.
all these justifications, right? These internal justifications that we have.
Yep.
And but I would be in the middle of this, and this isn't a conversation necessarily for now. I don't think for a lot of people, especially with church hurt, is I would see incredible things. I would see witness, uh, you know, like incredible revelation, incredible gifting, incredible gifts from
Mm.
these individuals. And I was fully convinced, I still am, that there was a genuine gift that they were walking in, that they were displaying in some form or fashion. And with Bob Hartley, for example, he'd have a dream, and then the next morning he would say, I found the 27 kinds of friendships in the Bible, and let me tell you where they're at and what they mean. And you're like, this, and he would share it. You'd be like, your mind would be blown because it would all make perfect sense. And I know, like, I've studied the Bible enough to know that these things exist in there.
Mm.
And then the
So
next night it would be
interesting.
something else. And it's like, this is just unbelievable. And it could literally, an entire ministry could be built on this one thing of teaching people these relationships, and he would do that all the time. And I
Wow.
was like so blown away by that. But at the same time, I watched him cheat with his prophetic
Hmm.
words, and
Hmm.
I call it tired eyes. Like, and he had his reasons. I think he just had he had five primary fissures when he was younger, and he operated from his fissures rather than trying to get healed from his fissures. He used them as leverage, to rally people around him.
And what did you say? Fissures? I don't know.
Yeah, fissures like
What's
cracks in the
that?
foundation. So
Oh.
so he had five primary faults in his identity since he was younger, and one of them was like rejection. One of them was rejection, and he shared a story about how he was ultimately rejected, and he lived based out of that rejection rather than seeing healing through it. But when he would display the rejection and he would use it against you, he'd say, "See, I told you about it. I'm working on this thing." But then
Oh.
you're part of this thing, his broken
Oh
process,
my
rather
goodness.
than it was
Yes. Oh,
the layers of manipulation
right.
are beyond comprehension,
Right.
really,
You
because
need
you're
to
like,
be
oh,
trauma informed because I would be like, no, that's not you shouldn't be leading in this place. But people who are coming who are hungry for God, they don't know that.
of course not.
No,
No.
right.
Yeah, and then you
Oh,
hear the
man.
dream, you hear the stories,
You're
and
like,
you're
yeah.
wowed by them. And it's so polarizing. It's so dynamic.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
for bringing us inside that because I think this is what often people do is they'll just say miracles don't happen. This is all a lie. They just become cessationalists and they say prophetic isn't real. Prophetic words don't actually happen. And we'll just say it's all a lie when what you're saying is it's not all a lie. There was a lot of real in the midst of not good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It is more of a mixed bag. And I do think it's not a conversation a lot of people can manage right now, especially
Yeah.
if you're going through trauma.
Mhm.
It's so much easier to say good and bad, that person's bad, let's just cut them off. I was talking to another, spiritual leader, and they use the word Hitler, and it's like it's so easy to say they're extraordinarily evil and that's it, just throw them away, rather than understanding like there can be situations that are very complex and where God could be involved and also the person could be extremely flawed, and
Right.
that takes a level and a measure of ownership for us to be able to start to sort through those pieces because it's so much easier for me to say they were evil, I was good, and let's throw all that experience away. And then I don't have to settle the uncertain pieces in my life. But for me to take measurement of ownership and responsibility to sort through those pieces and say, this was God, that wasn't, this was bad character, this was a bad decision. It takes effort, and it takes, a measure of my involvement to do that. And I don't think many people are willing and able to do that themselves, because they've so and I mentioned it in one of my videos, but we've so outsourced, our decision maker to other people, when it comes to like the whole go up the mountain, like Moses, go up the mountain, you make all the decisions, come back and tell us what to do. And that's, most Christians do that. They want their pastor to make all their decisions for them, and then they're happy to just accept whatever, the pastor gives them, and then fire their pastor if they're not happy, and
Right.
instead of taking personal ownership over your life and realizing that there's a lot of dynamics that you internally could have managed and controlled and affected differently, and it's hard to stomach that. It's hard to stomach the responsibility there.
Yes, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's a reminder for people as they're listening to this, just slow down. As I say something like, yes, they still have a gift, that doesn't mean you need to rush to that. I think this process is slow. So
Hmm.
if someone is in the middle of trauma, in the middle of this church hurt, if you need to say, I can't stand them and they're Hitler right now, and that's your way to process through this, do what you need to do in the midst of that pain. I
Hmm.
think people need to have permission to feel whatever they're feeling in the midst of that. And that, but what I would invite people to do is invite God into that process. I think sometimes we'll do it alone, or we'll do it with people who only hate them with you. And we're just going to stay. And this is where we don't need to get down this rabbit hole, but this is where I've seen people even get harmed from therapy for long time periods of time, because they just stay in therapy and they have the therapist is just kind of their coping mechanism, and they're not actually really learning how to live on their own.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think it's still good that we need to come back to talk to God about this,
Hmm.
and let God heal us. Like that means surrender, and that means we might hear from God something we don't necessarily like. So let's shift then.
Hmm.
After Bob, then
Hmm.
what happened after Bob?
Then I ended up in Kansas City. Wanted to get back in ministry. I spent a couple years running a learning and behavioral center, and so I started working for Shawn Bolz. I had a handful of traumatic experiences with Shawn. He kind of, revealed a hidden side of his behavior, hidden world that he was, I guess, in for a long, long time, of nakedness and other things. Pleasing himself in front of his staff, and on work trips, and really a lot of very inappropriate messaging, and different forms of sexual harassment. I guess you could categorize a lot of it as abuse in different ways. So
What was your
I
job
went through.
for, what was your
What's that?
job for him?
Well, I was an assistant initially, and then I started running his ministry. So I was the COO. I ran everything. I
And
started all the departments, and I ran his whole organization.
and
Um,
then when this abuse happened, I'm going to call it abuse, and I'm
yeah,
sorry that you had to sit through this as you're not realizing what the heck is happening.
yeah,
Was this just you were in a hotel room with him? Can you
yeah.
just, like, it wasn't out in the open with other people, it wasn't with women, but it was with male staff.
Yeah, yeah, and this all happened largely apart from the inappropriate messaging and outlandish jokes and stuff. Just me and him, where we'd be in a hotel room, and on different trips and stuff. He invited me to go to the Korean spa like a bunch of times. I ended up going once. I go through that whole story in one of my videos, and I I never once thought that a man of God would put somebody through these kinds of situations, and so I was so taken back by it. I froze, and I was emotionally arrested, And I tapped into that early trauma response that I mentioned from childhood. And
Yeah.
I just felt like I started doing the internal justifications thing because this is one of the most popular Christian ministers at the time, going around, and we filled up a schedule in an hour, the whole year of different appointments. We were on world tours with, 1,000 to 5,000 people in each room. And it was all positive in terms of the interaction that we were having with tens of thousands of people every week. We had millions of exposure every week online,
Right.
and um, I felt like I just froze. And so I quarantined it. But I did try to distance myself from these experiences after they happened. I didn't just lay down and allow them to continue. I made it so that I wouldn't go on the trips if I didn't need to. I sent another assistant because I didn't want to. I'd start distancing myself so I didn't have to do as much interaction apart from the business stuff. So I was able to I guess step away and push away enough in order for me to maintain a productive work environment while not addressing any of the stuff that happened. Um, and so
Yeah.
they
Can
would call
I?
me the dad in the office because I just kind of shut it all down.
Yeah. I just want to speak to something here for a
Mhm.
second. For just when you said you shut down, that's very, very normal. And what I, what I think for me as an outsider listening and get frustrated with is this is not something that you should have had to deal with, and that you're coming in with your heart going after the Lord, wanting to see people set free, and just this pure, I mean, your heart is so good and so pure, and to also see all the good things, and then to then be jarred with, why is this happening? This isn't happening. And then even for you having the past. Again, some people that don't understand trauma, they stay in their brain and they're not understanding what happens in the body when these kind of things happen. It's just like your body just, like you said, it just shut down. It's an automatic response. You can't help it. There's nothing wrong with you. And so I just wanted to name that for some people that kind of stay in their brain or want to stay spiritual, that trauma is an automatic response that we can't help. And if you have something from the past, like you said, that doesn't mean that you're more at fault or not. It just means that your body is just going to go to that. Some people go to attack. So,
Mhm.
some people will isolate. There's different responses that we all will have. None of it is bad. It's all normal. So I just want to speak to that. Even for people listening, like, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? We don't know what will happen when things get in that place, and it's so scary. So I just wanted to name that, and especially for you, you're not the man and the man of God that's in charge, and so can you talk about, was any of that going on? Like, would anybody believe me? Is this actually happening? Can you share a little bit of that was happening for you?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out. The inner struggle, the conversations internally, you know, were pretty intense. Just trying to sort through, what do I do? Will anybody believe me? Who do I go to? Do I just internalize this? Um, and I actually go in detail. It's a longer video. I describe why I stayed. So I think that's probably something to watch. But part of the internal process for me was I was asking myself, I say selfishly, what can I endure? Because there's promises that were said to me that I could go after and who I could become, and
Yes.
um, and I felt like I was partnering with God in what I was doing, and it was
Yeah.
such a privilege role
Yes.
that I can't just walk away from this, or I may be walking away from what God has for me. And all the biblical scriptures come to mind of pushing through and enduring and
Yeah.
not quitting. And
Mm.
so I wrestled in my past. I belonged to three-time state championship wrestling teams, and I played football, and I belonged to three-time state championship football teams, so I'm familiar with pain, and so I just push through. You just push through, you endure, you don't quit. And I just made those determinations in my own mind of what I was going to participate in, because it was just emotional pain. That's kind of how I just resulted it. It's just emotional pain, and I'll just internalize it, which is and I think I stayed for some selfish reasons, but also I was the only employment or the person employed in my family, at the time. And so I'm like, quitting would be tremendously difficult financially for my family as well.
Yeah.
I was in LA. And so anyway, there's a lot of, justifications that I guess made in terms of staying. But I genuinely always hoped that it would get better. Right. And I started those conversations like, maybe this is his worst and maybe I can help, and maybe that's the codependency piece of like, I can help him get better,
Yeah.
I can maybe still do good with this ministry. And at that point, I'd been working with him for several years, and I'm building a ministry that I felt like God wanted me to build and help. So am I willing to tear it all down if I start being an adversarial voice against the ministry that I started building? So many layers, because I'm pouring my heart and soul into this thing. I wrote 70% of his books or more. And so the books that are being sold is part of the ministry that I'm participating in. And so I'm having to, understand all of that. It's very layered. It's not just a pure abuse of a victim that was, unrelated, unconnected. There's many layers. So,
Right.
and I do want to mention, I had minimized my circle of influence tremendously because of this job, because of the travel and everything. So this was my friend group. This was my spiritual leader.
Wow.
This was it, because I worked 68 hours a week, and I was with these people all the time, the people that I
Yeah.
hired. And so I didn't have time for anybody else. Like, I didn't, in terms of going outside to go to a church, I was at a church. We were speaking at a church every Sunday. I didn't go to another church, you know.
Yes.
And
Right.
so like my world of influence was so small, and so this was it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I guess to pick up the question that you had earlier in terms of the ensued trauma, I about midway through my time with Shawn, my wife at the time came over for lunch one day and told me that she had been cheating on me and she wanted an open marriage. And if I don't give her an open marriage, then she wants a divorce. And it was all surprise to me because I'm just got my head down. I'm like, building out this ministry, and felt like I was doing the right thing in life, but clearly missing something very big, in terms of what was going on in her life. And I valued myself enough at this point with the internal relationship that I had with her that I was like, I'm not going to accept the open marriage thing, then I'll pursue a divorce because you've clearly been cheating for several months already at this point.
Man, I'm
And
so sorry, Jeremy.
and this person, before I cried already about it, this person I met at ministry school,
Oh,
and we got 100% on our tests of our pre-marriage tests. They told us a perfect, situation, perfect scores. It's like we cheated because we scored so well. You take the tests on your own computers,
yeah,
uh,
right,
and
right.
went through the whole thing at Bethel, and it was a good test. The test was designed to break people up, and we scored 100%. And they just went off and just jumped off the deep end in terms of the relationship stuff, and I didn't see any of it coming.
Yeah.
um, and so I guess to describe it, it was the most hurt, wounded betrayal I'd ever experienced in my entire life. It felt like my heart was ripped out of my chest, and where the individual cells of your body are exploding. Like
Oh,
I couldn't
yeah.
comprehend the immense emotional pain that I experienced at that time. It was unbelievable. And the only thing that I felt like held me together was when I lay on the floor and that I would stop spinning,
Mm,
because your hope and your dream and everything you built is just ripped out of your
yeah.
hands in a moment. And I didn't actively, I wasn't aware of it actually happening until it happened to me. It was all
Right.
a surprise.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and so I'm in this very tight knit circle, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
and and I remember I was sleeping on, Sean and Sheree let me stay at their place for a week in one of their pool bungalows on on the floor, and I've got my dog, and I am I just felt like I got pulled apart, cell by cell, and I'm trying to figure out what's good and what's bad, what's
Right.
like you're hanging on to anything you can hang on to,
Oh,
and I felt like I just put worship music on every night, cried, and I'm trying to process this because it's like, you want to let people in, but at the same time they're going to go through the trauma response with you when you let them know. And I couldn't handle anybody else sharing this over and over again with people. So I'm like just trying to figure out what my next steps are, like how I can actually breathe. You know,
okay,
it's crazy.
that's a really good point that you're sharing there. That's where some people have a hard time going to therapy because having to tell your story is so painful. And then to take a risk of that person, one, not being able to handle it and not giving you a response that's actually helpful, or because a lot of times we don't respond very well.
Hmm.
Best response is just empathy. Listen, I hear you. That is like literally the best response. Go to Brene Brown, search empathy. That's how you respond when somebody talks about anything that's difficult and you're like, I don't know how to handle this. Poker face, empathy. That is how you respond back. But I mean, for you to have to be, not even have anyone to even talk to, Jeremy, that is so hard. So I want to make sure I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure I can get to your healing.
Sure.
So, and how, so you're starting to get into the healing, but can you share how you got out of Shawn's ministry and then basically kind of your journey of getting healed?
Yeah. So actually, during that time of kind of sorting through my betrayal, I listened and watched a few courses from Dr. Joe Beam, incredible courses. And he's got Marriage Helpers, his ministry. That was incredibly helpful in that time of betrayal. And I went on a journey of a few years of self mastery, in addition to partnering with God and inviting God in. But I tried the best that I could possibly to sort my thoughts as a third party and evaluate the thoughts that I had as a third party, and sort my emotions as a third party and evaluate those emotions, and not let any thought or emotion dictate my identity if I hadn't fully vetted it. And
Hmm.
so I went through, I kind of, like I itemized my thoughts and my emotions and just sorted them. And
Mm.
I tried to test them and make sure that it lined up with my future. And so I didn't just allow an emotion or a thought to come in and dictate how I was supposed to act, because I knew like my emotions and my thoughts were like tornadoes,
Mhm.
they were like roller coasters. And
Mhm.
so I really started that self mastery, and I did slow down, like you said in the beginning, and actually started to sort those things. And it took about 2 to 3 years to be fully, like, to feel like I fully, achieved like a measure of healing that I wanted. Um, I got some quicker results because of individual experiences I had. Like there was a couple that came to me the week that I found out I was having a divorce, and somebody, now a friend of mine, said, you know, I know exactly what you're going through right now. You're going to make it. You're going to make it
Mhm.
through. And I can see your future and you're going to be okay.
Oh,
And you have no idea what that means when your entire world was just blown up by a grenade, and then you hear this from somebody.
yes.
And that happened 2 other times that same week for me. And it was like, oh, I felt loved by God. I felt loved by
Yeah.
people. They came and
Yeah.
found me, and it was just so beautiful. I didn't know them before. And so I've kept a steady relationship with God throughout the whole thing, and I tried the best in my heart to not blame God, because I
Mhm.
understand my limitation. I understand the limitation of people,
Mhm.
and I decided that I didn't want to fire the most helpful person potentially in my life with these experiences, which would be God. I don't want to fire him for
I
what I
love
experienced.
that. I
So,
didn't want to, I love that. I didn't want to fire God. That's the best
so
line, Jeremy.
yeah, and I guess maybe I'll finish with this unless you have other questions. I was asking, most of the time we get stuck on the questions that are in our heart and mind about why they did this and why didn't they do this and why did I do this and why didn't God do this? And we have all these questions. And I'm asking God to show me um, where he can relate and where was he when this person betrayed me? Where was he? Show me where you were. Where were you involved? Like, how can you help me get perspective from this? Because I felt blindsided by it. It obviously, upended my life. And Jesus showed me a time and a place where he was betrayed by that person and shared the scenario and the situation where they, were exchanging in their heart and their actions where he was first betrayed. And he walked me through his emotions and his thoughts at that time. And I knew at that time that he was the most relatable person in my life. Like he knew my pain and trauma more than I knew my pain and trauma.
Mm.
And at that moment, I felt like all of the questions I had and the questions I will have could be answered in his relatability because he there wasn't anything left. He didn't leave anything open ended like he couldn't answer. And so my capacity for life increased, and
Ah,
instantly because I was no longer hanging on to this what if and why didn't you and all of these open-ended questions because he showed me the relatable piece of himself. And my output for life increased tremendously after
so how can we do that? Because I
that.
feel like can you lead into some, kind of some advice to how we can do that? Because just listening to you, even just the way
Mm,
you're communicating your story, I don't hear bitterness. I mean,
mm,
I just hear God was with you all the time, even
mm,
through this difficulty, even with your ex-wife that you're, I mean, I didn't
mm,
even hear bitterness when you were talking
mm,
about that
mm, mm.
situation. I mean, I
Sure.
just so how can we find God in that place of our pain?
I love that question. And I realized early on, everybody has their own choices, and I can't force my spouse to make choices. I can't force my daughter to make choices. Everybody's got their own choices, and so there has to be a freedom in that. And the number one advocate we have is Jesus in all of our choices. And we may not understand our circumstances and situations in life, but if we can keep our heart open to His help, then I feel like we will be better off. And so, reading through the story of Job, I hung on to he did not blame God, in the middle of these crazy. I mean, you read through that book, it's insane. He lost everything and he didn't blame God. And it's a choice when we don't understand the circumstances and situations to blame God. But we don't have to. Um, and what I tried to do is I tried to pray not only for the people that I saw opposition with, which is extremely hard to do, by the way. That's not easy. I tried to find out from God's heart how I could pray,
Yeah, that's
and
good.
rather than allowing my anger, like because I had tremendous
That's so
anger at
good.
the time, and or allowing maybe bitterness to take hold, because it's so easy to just become callous to people and to life and to organizations and
Yeah,
run away.
right?
But I got the promise of God, and the measure of relationship I had with God was so strong that I always had him. He always took care of me. And even when I was laying on the floor and my world was spinning, I felt like God was there, and I felt like I was comforted in some way. Um, and so I think it is a measure of perspective. It's a measure of the way we engage with God and how we interact with God. But for us individually, to be open to God's feedback and asking God for His involvement is way better than trying to tell Him what we want out of a scenario or what we want to feel, because oftentimes we have no idea what we want and what we need, in the prayerful sense. So
Would you
hopefully that
say that
helps.
you know that does? And when you are able to ask God how to pray for this person, then to be able to pray and bless them, even though you're angry and they're causing this destruction to you,
Yeah.
would you say, because this is what's happened to me whenever I've done this, I feel like I grow love for them and then I grow authority for them, not like I'm in charge of them, but it's almost like I'm like, why am I letting this bother me? There's like a movement that happens where I can see in the spirit what's happening. And I now am just focusing at the task at hand, which is like my children or my husband or making a meal. Like all of a sudden it's like clarity comes to this person doesn't have power over my life. It's
Yes.
not that God doesn't care about the trauma, he doesn't care about the pain. But when we are able to partner with him, release forgiveness, pray a blessing, it's almost like the weight falls off.
Yes. And I think you alluded to something I've harped on a good bit, which is to find the measure of responsibility we can own either in our the situation that took place or in our future. How much can we own? How much can we take responsibility for so that we can get the power back for our lives?
Yeah.
And so much of us have given that power away and say blamed the person and it's always their fault and I'm not involved at all, and they're clearly victims in a lot of these situations in the moment where they're just pure victims. They weren't involved. But what you can do today is you can own your future. You can
Right.
own the future decision making.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are confused about what repentance actually is too. um, and I say it because repentance and forgiveness. So if we were to go into a stage of forgiveness with the person who abused us, it's for us.
Mm.
It's primarily for me. This forgiveness piece. It's so that I'm not stuck.
Yeah.
And so many of us are like, well, it's I need to forgive them, and it's for them. No, it's for me. It's for me to
Yeah.
be stuck.
Right.
And if I'm in unforgiveness, I'm the one that's stuck.
Right.
And I don't think most people get that. And so they're harboring unforgiveness, they're harboring bitterness, resentment. They're the ones that are stuck. They're stuck by their own doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, why aren't they moving forward in their life? Why aren't they advancing in their love and their capacity? And it's because they have chosen a path that doesn't allow them to move forward. And it does take a measure of ownership in that. It's like, well, uh, but this thing happened to me. I'm like, yeah, the thing happened to me too, and to many of us. But we need to find a measurement of what we can own today and how we can accept one step forward today. What's the 1% we can change today to make it better?
I feel
Rather
like,
than just, yeah. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I feel like there's some people, because I can tell there's some people that are potentially getting bothered by this.
Sure.
If you're listening and you're watching and you're not at that place, that's not where you're at, and that's okay. You need to go to where Jeremy was on the floor and where he was in pain, inviting Jesus into that. So I think it's important when you're in this place of trauma to know where you're at and to not rush this. That's the one thing as a therapist that I've learned. You cannot rush trauma. You can't rush healing. We try to rush it by being, you're healed in Jesus' name. And it does happen. It does. I've seen it happen, but very rarely with trauma does it get healed right away. And you have to go back to the step of crying on the floor, allowing God into that place. And you stay there as long as you feel heard. You've got to be able to feel heard. You've got to be able to feel seen by God so that you can get off the floor and then you can, okay, I'm ready to take ownership. I'm ready to forgive. But I just really want to make sure people know you
Mhm.
can't rush that part. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely. And there's so many different variations of trauma. You can't just jump ahead.
No.
Especially certain kinds of trauma require lots of healing, lots
Yes.
of very intentional healing. And like I mentioned, I was doing the self-mastery stuff for 2 to 3 years. So, but where I'm at today, the perspective I'm speaking from today is I'm trying to find my measurement of radical ownership so that I can actually do something meaningful with the trauma I experienced
Mm,
and not, and allow it to have purpose and meaning and
mhm.
not let it dictate me in a negative way where it
Good.
negatively affects my life. And
Yeah.
so, I was able to choose to love again. And I've
Mhm.
been married for 8 years, 7 or 8 years at this point now, and I've a little girl,
Oh,
and I was able to, I've written 47 books.
oh my
I've
gosh,
been a
Jeremy.
ghostwriter for other people and sharing their stories and their trauma and their wonderful stories and God stories
Yeah.
um, and their victories. And um,
Mm,
you know, I was able to love God through it,
mm.
and I'm not perfect in any way. I've made many mistakes, but I know that I fell back into forgiving arms, and so God could use my redemptive story for good. And I'm trying to figure out what that is for myself. What's that redemptive story? Because the redemptive story is what Christianity is all about. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to do every day, and that's why I'm open to sharing my story. Because at the end of the day, I didn't need to make any videos about my trauma. I didn't need to share it publicly, but I knew it could help some people. And so I felt like it was worth doing. It was worth paying the price to do that.
Well, and I'm so grateful for you doing that and for the courage of you speaking out. Because I know that there are people that watch your video. So I'll put the link of your video on there and also where they can find you on YouTube. That you do have a YouTube channel, and I'm gonna just spell his name for those who are listening. It's JeremyButrous. So he has a YouTube channel where you can actually watch his testimony and he shares in more detail about it. Because that's basically how people could get a hold of you is through your YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah,
Okay, and Jeremy is not a therapist and he is not a coach. So
that's correct.
we were talking about it beforehand that he has a lot of people that when they hear him, they think, "Oh, I can talk to you. You're somebody I can trust. Because you're somebody who gets it." Can you talk a little bit about what that's like that you're not a therapist and that you don't feel called to be the one that helps? Because I think sometimes people think just because they have a testimony and they share it, and I think that also could be a problem with ministry too, is people, we go
Yeah,
and think that they can fix everything. And it's like, no, we all
yeah,
have our lane. We all have a different
yeah.
lane.
I think it's very valid that you bring that up. You should be very mindful and prayerful with who you share your story with, professionally and in your friend group as well. Especially if it's related to trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, varying degrees of trauma. You shouldn't just share it with everybody. But I understand me sharing my trauma has opened up a conversation with people about their trauma. And, I received like 3,000 messages in like 48 hours after I released one of my videos. And
Wow.
it's overwhelming, the personal messages where people are sharing their trauma with me. And I was taken back by it because I had no idea of what was happening. But I understand why. And maybe they're like, he understands. He's a safe space. And I shared in one of my videos, I'm not skilled. I'm not capable of managing and processing anybody's trauma really with them. I'm not a pastor I'm over them. I'm not a victim advocate. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a life coach. I'm simply just trying to share my perspective, my opinion, and what I went through. And there are very skilled individuals whom I've met many, including my wife. She's a doctor of psychology. She's very skilled at helping people. And that is not my skill set in that way. I'm a good teacher, but not for people's trauma, especially if it involves anything that may need to be documented and put on a health journey
Mm,
as it pertains to professional victim advocate tied to some type of legal proceeding. If there's a civil or criminal legal proceeding, which many of them are, you need to be in the right hands because, again, even me sharing publicly, that's not where everybody should do. That's not what everybody should do because it exposes you and it opens you up to scrutiny. And so there's proper process, I think, that everybody should go through, depending on their situation, to talk to the right individuals. And it does vary based on what kind of help you need. But hopefully, I can speak to that. Get some professional feedback, professional help, based on your own experience, so you can be positioned correctly and get the help you need.
Mm. That's good. I really appreciate what you just shared because I think sometimes people feel bad or we feel like we are responsible for things or people that we're not. You have really good boundaries. Like to me, what you just explained there was really good boundaries. Because you could be like, I'm responsible for all 3,000 of these people. And you seem so clear-headed with the goal and the purpose and the calling that is in your life. And you're directed in that direction and not because I think sometimes as Christians, it's like there's all these good things and I need to help all these people. And I think it's important for us to come back to knowing what's our assignment right now and what is God calling us right now, and to do that and to not overstretch things that we're not supposed to, because then we're exhausted and we're tired and we don't have capacity. And I think many of us do that. And because we're supposed to do good and help people and love people. And that doesn't mean everybody.
Yeah, and I definitely didn't want to join any trauma bonds, with
Oh,
individuals as well.
that's
There's
wise.
many groups,
Mhm.
that reminisce and ruminate on
Mhm.
their trauma, that I've been
Yes.
aware of now that I wasn't aware of before, and their trauma against organizations, their trauma against, clergy abuse, and um, it's pretty incredible. And so I've just tried to, share my story openly, to open and help a conversation move down the road for more accountability and more structure to come into the church, and for people to get the tools and resources they need. So thank you so much for having me
Good.
on here. I've
Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
absolutely. Yeah, this has been wonderful having you. Would you be willing to pray?
Sure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Jesus, for being the most relatable person, to us in our lives, even if we can't comprehend where you were or where you are. We can give our heart fully to the faith and belief of your involvement today. And we are so grateful for where you've been in the different stages of our life, and what you intend to do in and through us, God, and how you desire to bring a redemptive path forward in our relationships and in our heart and in our mind, and how you desire to help guide and steer the path that we're on, into the ways that you see fitting, and into the most beautiful, wonderful, redemptive story that we could possibly imagine. We thank you, Jesus. And we bless Heidi for creating a platform to invite you in. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so
Amen.
much,
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Strong Tower Mental Health Podcast. I would love it if you would rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen. Your review helps the show reach more people and spread mental health awareness with Jesus. You can also check out my book, The Brave Encourager, wherever books are sold, and check me out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or my website at HeidiMortenson.com. See you at our next episode.